Reactive training systems.
A question that comes up from time to time for us is how to handle training for military service or some sort of situation where you have to perform a fitness test essentially for your job, and then also powerlifting. It depends on the situation that you're in. It depends on kind of how you want to approach it. I was in the Air Force from 2007 to 2012, and that was also kind of my period of competitive powerlifting where I was probably at my most competitive. The way that I approached training for the fitness test at that time was I wanted to do enough PT to be able to pass my fitness test. But my main focus physically at the time is powerlifting. That was fine for me at the time. The job that I was in did not depend at all on my ability to run 1.5 miles or anything like that. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, the way that I handled it might be a satisfactory solution for you. So the way I handled it was I did enough training that I was able to pass my PT test comfortably, and that was that. You know, it's almost background noise at that point. You know, it's training that you do because you have to do it. It's just kind of non-negotiable. You know, if I don't do that training, then I'm going to have a lot bigger problems. You know, I would run once or twice a week, and usually, so in the Air Force, for me, it was a 1.5 mile run, maximum push-ups in 1 minute, maximum sit-ups in 1 minute, and then abdominal circumference, a waist measurement. So the waist measurement is weight management, which seemed to be a non-issue for me. The push-ups were also a non-issue. I think if you're a powerlifter and you bench press, then doing the maximum number of push-ups in a minute is not generally going to be a problem. So I would train sit-ups a few times. It didn't seem to take much for me. The biggest hang-up for me was the run. So I would train the run once or twice a week, usually, and as the test approached, I may ramp that up to 2, sometimes 3 times a week. But generally it was whatever I needed to do in order to get myself to pass the test. At the same time, different situations are sometimes vastly different. If you're in a situation where your job actually does depend on your ability to maybe run 1 mile or something like that, the PT test it matters to you more than just pass it, then that's going to be a different situation. If your PT test is more demanding than, you know, kind of the Air Force basic PT test, which is frankly not all that demanding, then you're going to want to take a different approach. And honestly, I'm probably not the best suited for that type of strategy. I think, well, what I would do if I had a client who was in that situation, where we kind of had multiple goals, you know, so they want to be a great powerlifter, but also they need to do more than the minimum in order to excel at their job, PT wise. I would start doing some research. I would look at what other people have done on this problem already, because I mean, at this point, there's information out there on people who train for military, police, fire, PT tests. There's kind of the whole hybrid performance kind of movement where people, you know, are training for powerlifting and also running a marathon and things like that. I think those types of things can serve as creative inspiration for you in terms of what should you do. Well, what are some experiments you can try? I would look into stuff like that. Also, this whole thing assumes you have quite a bit of latitude in how you're going to train for these types of events. I was also fortunate that I had a ton of latitude. Some people are not so lucky. Some people have unit PT that happens every morning at 5 a.m. or whatever. And if that's the case, then it's just part of how you have to live, at least for that period of time. So that's what you do. You go do your unit PT and you do your training on your own time, and you let that unit PT kind of become part of the overall picture of your individualized athletic response. So yeah, I think that's hopefully a slightly helpful way to look at this problem. I know that this isn't a thing that applies to everybody, but it is a problem that comes up now and then. And I would say, just to kind of piggyback onto that, a somewhat related thing that I see with some lifters, especially if we're talking about intermediate qualified powerlifters or below, especially ones that don't necessarily take this super seriously. They're either older athletes or they're just not all that serious about powerlifting, and they're more concerned with general health. A lot of times they'll have similar questions as far as like how to incorporate more aerobic work, or how to do some energy systems work for weight management. And if that's the case, that's a pretty distinct scenario in my mind. In those cases, I think that you don't necessarily want to hammer the energy system work. I think you want to do enough of it, that it'll help in terms of weight management. But for where most powerlifters are at, most people who I've had this conversation with, what they really need is to focus on their nutrition strategies. That aside, if your concern is more about aerobic development, then I think at that point you're kind of back to trying to figure out how much of your resources do you want to devote to this issue. Is this a situation where you go, I'd be happy if I was getting 1 or 2 sessions a week. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. But if you're really trying to maximize it, well, you're probably not having this conversation with me, which is not a bad thing. But again, I would encourage you to look into some of those training paradigms that are more designed around this problem. How do I, both compete in powerlifting and run a marathon, like that type of thing.
Reactive training systems.